October 1347. A ship arrives at the port of Messina. The people on the dock walk toward it, excited, curious. Then they stop. Most of the sailors aboard were dead. The ones still alive were covered in black boils, oozing blood and pus. The authorities screamed to push the ships back into the sea. But it was already too late. What came off those ships that morning? You couldn't see it. You couldn't smell it. You couldn't stop it. And over the next 5 years, it would kill more than 20 million people in Europe alone, almost 1/3 of the entire continent. This is the real story of the Black Death, and it is far more terrifying than anything Hollywood ever made. Chapter 1. Where did it come from? Most people think the Black Death started in Europe. It didn't. Its true origins lie in Central Asia, specifically in the steppes of modern-day Kazakhstan and Mongolia. For decades, it quietly existed among wild rodents in those vast grasslands. Historians believe it started in China in 1334 and spread rapidly along trade routes westward. The Silk Road, the greatest trade network in the ancient world, connected China to the Middle East to Europe. Spices, silk, gold, exotic animals moved along these routes for centuries, but in the 1340s, something else moved along them too. The plague was transmitted from rodents to humans by the bite of infected fleas living on black rats. These rats traveled on every merchant ship, every trading caravan, every wagon crossing the continent. Nobody noticed them. Nobody could. By the time the first symptoms appeared in a human, it was already spreading to the next 10 people around them. It reached Europe in 1347. 5 years later, somewhere between 25 and 50 million people were dead. To understand how terrifying that number is, imagine 1/3 of every person you have ever known gone in 5 years. That is what Europe experienced. Chapter 2. What did it actually do to your body? This is the part that people don't fully understand. The Black Death was not just one disease. It was a combination of 3 forms of plague: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic, each with its own symptoms and method of killing. The bubonic plague, the most common form. It began with something that felt like the flu: fever, chills, headache, fatigue. You thought you were just tired. Then, on the 2nd or 3rd day, the lymph nodes swelled into painful, pus-filled boils called buboes. Fever, vomiting, headaches, giddiness, pain through the entire body, delirium. These buboes grew to the size of an apple. In your armpits, your neck, your groin, they turned black. That is where the name Black Death came from. The survival rate without treatment, roughly 50%. The pneumonic plague spread through the air. It attacked the lungs directly and was highly contagious. Just breathing near an infected person could kill you. You could be completely healthy in the morning, coughing blood by evening, dead by the following night. The septicemic plague, the rarest and most brutal. It entered the bloodstream directly and caused massive internal bleeding throughout the entire body. People turned black from the inside. Some died before a single visible symptom appeared outside their body. You could wake up healthy, feel a slight discomfort at noon, and be dead before sunset. No warning, no chance. Medieval doctors had absolutely no idea what was happening. They had no concept of bacteria or infection. They believed the plague was caused by bad air. They called it miasma. Their solution? Burn strong-smelling herbs, carry flowers to block the smell, avoid bathing, because they believed open pores let the bad air in. Every single thing they did made it spread faster. Chapter 3. What happened to society? Complete collapse. The physical death was only part of the horror. What the Black Death did to human society, to families, to governments, to religion, was equally devastating. When people began dying faster than they could be buried, something broke inside civilization itself. Families abandoned each other. Historical accounts from the period describe fathers leaving sick children, children running from dying parents, husbands locking sick wives outside their own homes and never returning. Not because they were cruel, because they were terrified. And they were right to be. Cities ran out of coffins within weeks. Then they ran out of graveyards. Bodies were piled in mass graves, hundreds together, and covered quickly with soil. Priests refused to perform last rites because it meant standing next to the dying. The church, which had been the most powerful institution in Europe for centuries, suffered a catastrophic loss of authority. People had been told, "Pray, and God will protect you." They prayed. They died anyway. Priests died. Bishops died. Monks locked inside monasteries died together when one infected brother entered. If God's own servants couldn't be protected, what did prayer mean? For millions of Europeans, the Black Death shattered their faith in the church permanently. This gave rise to one of the most disturbing movements in history, the Flagellants. Groups of people who believed God was punishing humanity for its sins, and that the only solution was to publicly punish themselves. They marched from city to city, whipping their own backs until they bled, believing their suffering would satisfy God's anger. Crowds watched in horror and fascination. And, tragically, as the Flagellants moved between cities, they spread the plague further. Chapter 4. The ones who were blamed, and the atrocities that followed. When people don't understand something, they look for someone to blame. In 14th century Europe, the Jews were blamed for the Black Death. The accusation was completely fabricated. The Jewish communities had poisoned the water wells to kill Christians. There was zero evidence, not a single shred. But fear doesn't need evidence. Between 1348 and 1351, Jewish communities across Europe were massacred. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jewish people were burned alive in a single day in February 1349. In Mainz, 12,000 killed. In other cities, entire communities were wiped out before the plague had even arrived. People were murdering their neighbors to prevent a disease they didn't understand, and in doing so, causing more death and chaos than the plague itself in those areas. Pope Clement VI issued a papal bull, an official church order, stating that Jews were not responsible for the plague and that the massacres must stop. It was largely ignored. This period of violence became one of the darkest chapters in European history, and its effects on Jewish communities lasted for centuries. Entire villages simply ceased to exist. Historians estimate that over 1,000 villages across England, France, and Germany were completely abandoned during the Black Death, never to be repopulated. Today, archaeologists sometimes find them buried under fields, ghost villages, the last evidence that thousands of people once lived, loved, and died there. Chapter 5. How it ended and what it changed forever. By the 1350s, the worst of the initial wave had passed, not because anyone stopped it, not because medicine improved, but because there were simply fewer humans left for it to infect. The plague had burned through the population so fast, it ran out of easy victims. Plague still reappeared in waves for centuries afterward, continuing to kill millions across Europe and Asia. But nothing matched the horror of those first 5 years. Now here's the part that changes everything you thought you knew about the Black Death. Because what came after was, in a deeply strange way, transformative. With 1/3 of Europe's population dead, there was a massive labor shortage. For the first time in centuries, poor peasants and workers had power. Before the plague, peasants were essentially owned by landowners. They worked for almost nothing, with no rights, no choices. After the plague, lords desperately needed workers, and workers knew it. Peasants began demanding higher wages, better conditions, the right to move between employers. When lords refused, workers simply walked away to someone who would agree. The rigid feudal system, which had dominated Europe for 500 years, began to crack. The loss of faith in the church pushed educated Europeans toward a new idea. Maybe human beings could understand the world through reason, not just prayer. Historians trace a direct line from the Black Death to the beginning of the Renaissance, the explosion of art, science, literature, and human achievement that transformed Europe. The plague killed 50 million people, and from that devastation, modern Europe was born. Nearly 700 years later, the Black Death still haunts the world as the worst-case scenario for an epidemic. And it should, because it proves something that humanity keeps forgetting. The most dangerous enemy in history never carried a sword. It was invisible.